We're speaking to Dr. Wildman from Newcastle about health and Brexit. So thank you again for joining us. Could you give us a summary of your paper, please?
Sure. So this actually came about because I was asked in the wake of the referendum to give a talk about how Brexit and the decision to vote to leave may affect the health service and the health of the population more generally. Now, given that this is very much opinion based, I thought instead of just talking to me, I'd ask some of my colleagues, health economists around the globe, the US, Canada, Australia, as well as in Europe and Britain, what their views were on Brexit, and try to get some sense of were there positives, were there negatives, and then how we think we should look to the future in terms of dealing with the Brexit issue. What I can say is that within the respondents that we had, everybody who responded voted to remain. So I think that partly reflects the fact that in academia, people are largely on the remain side. It may also be a case that to some degree, people are a little bit nervous about expressing leave views within academia, which is very strongly remain. So in terms of the positives, there weren't many. People were actually quite angry, but people could see certain ones around the boost to exports that would come through the devaluation of the pound, through the fact that it sort of changes the nature of the government. And again, I have to say that this was written prior to the election. So although it came out afterwards, the political element has changed as well anyway. But that sense of the change within the government in the sense of addressing the concerns of those people at the very bottom of the income distribution and also the health distribution. There was also seemed to be positives in terms of helping training and a focus on improving the sort of training of homegrown nurses and doctors. In terms of negatives, the main things were around the economy in general and how the fact that NHS spending is very closely related to the general GDP, the general economy, and so how they move together. If we go into recession as a result of Brexit, or if we boom as a result of Brexit, we could see a big reductions in health spending, or we potentially could see big increases. Obviously, nobody raised the £350 million a week, other than to say that was obviously well, I'm trying to think of a polite way of putting it, but maybe less than a genuine statement. So nobody believed any credibility of that. Again, the other thing that the respondents picked up on was, again, these problems about for academia and what that would mean in terms of trained academics and research. And that's across the whole development and testing of products, as well as just the very need for people to the doctors, the nurses, and that side of things.
So you mentioned that obviously this paper was done before the election, and that really highlights how politics is constantly changing. Even this week, we've had like sort of U-turns by parties and new statements brought out. How do you think that's affecting the public's opinion and also academics' opinion of Brexit and health? So
in terms of how opinions are changing, I think it's very difficult, actually. I think what you seem to see is that there's a core, I think there's a sense that because of the vote, a lot of people who voted Remain have come to accept the fact that there's going to be some element of leaving the EU. And I think part of that is reflected by the fact that within the main political parties, there's not a particular area where or group that the people can go to on the Remain side. In terms of leave, I think what you have is this general sense of confusion about how things will pan out. And because of that, you get misinformation filling the void. And that makes it very difficult in terms of saying where you think it will go in terms of the health and the health service specifically. Hopefully, we do get some more clarity, especially around immigration and labour, because that, of course, is crucial for the running of the NHS. And I think as that comes home, and we've seen sort of issues in recruitments of nurses, as those things start to come home, I wonder if that will start to change opinions a little bit more towards a sort of an anti-Brexit side of things. But hopefully these things can start to be resolved over the next 12 months or so.
And so what do you think are the main issues about researching the effect that Brexit is having? Because obviously it's constantly moving.
So I think for academia, Brexit is a real challenge, and I think the government really needs, within all the bigger issues that they're trying to deal with around the economy and actually the negotiations, to think about how to deal with academics and academia, because the labour market for academics is very international. We rely on lots of Europeans, not just to do the research, but also just to teach our students. So the functioning courses, it's important for us to have a clear understanding of how we're going to get academics into the labour market, into our universities, and to stop those academics from leaving, from academics who are already here from leaving the UK. We rely on international collaboration. So leaving the EU is a reduction in the sense of where our funds can come from. So a lot of the EU funding, there's already anecdotal evidence that British academics are finding it hard to get a foothold into that, or are being asked not to be on grants. However, it may actually also encourage some academics to start to think about alternative areas of research and grant funding, maybe towards the developing world outside of Europe. So in a certain sense, it may help us to look beyond what we've been used to in terms of the EU. I think the biggest challenge, though, or one of the biggest challenges, academia is about the sharing of ideas, and it's about challenging ideas, it's about criticism, it's about learning. And when you've got the discipline, the academics as a whole, largely on the Remain side of things, I think it's important to think these are going to be people at the vanguard of researching the impacts of Brexit, in terms of trying to think of ways of mitigating any negative impacts of Brexit, in terms of exploiting the positives that could come with Brexit. And it's important that academics are fully engaging in that process and not thinking, well, actually, we voted to remain and we're going to just sort of navel gaze and sulk. I think it's important for us to embrace and to move things on and to do the best for the society, in the sense of that's what our research is supposed to be doing.
So what's next for the research? Is it to continue basically looking at opinions and sort of looking at the economy side of the impact of Brexit?
I think in terms of research, I think partly what's next is we're going to be actually just considering what the structures and new structures are going to look like. So if we're thinking about in terms of health researchers, we're going to lose the European Medical Agency, which is about the evaluation and the economic evaluations of drugs. How is that going to be replaced within the health service? How are we going to have our own standards in place? Are we going to have our own regulatory bodies and frameworks in place? And these all need to be constructed. So I think there's that element of trying to think of what the institutions are going to look like. I think what you're going to see a lot from health economists and economists in general is initially what's the impact of Brexit. So looking at Brexit as a type of natural experiment about how does it actually impact on people's lives, people's decisions, on their health, on their income, on their work patterns. So I think we're going to get a lot of research looking at those. And I think it will be through that and looking through a lot of the heterogeneity and responses to that we'll start to be able to identify where there are potential benefits and those things that we should focus on and try to exploit more, and those parts where there are real weaknesses and real problems. From terms of my own research, my own work, which has stemmed a lot from health inequalities, what I'm particularly interested in is what's going to be happening to those people down at the lower end of the income distribution, the lower end of the health distribution. Are we going to see widening inequalities, or is Brexit actually going to provide a framework for us to think about ways of narrowing some of these social inequalities?
That's really interesting. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll put a link to the paper below this video.
Super.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.